I'm Christopher Schoenwald, and welcome to Life as a show intently focused on helping people find their professional pathway by exploring and unearthing the details of jobs from around the world. Before we get into today's episode, I just want to throw this out there. I have a channel over on YouTube, Life as a ... which basically hosts highlights from these audio conversations that I have with these great guests. They typically run 10 to 15 minutes, and they're there to kind of present a different vantage point. You know, for people that aren't into audio, aren't into podcasts, but are still looking for career advice, ideas, help, all that great stuff, send them over to YouTube. Like I said, Life as a ... And if you do get over there, I would love that like or subscribe. I mean, it's the best way to let that algorithm know that the content is worth sharing and should be out there. So anyway, I do thank you for letting me plug this a little bit, but I think it's about time to get into today's episode. Now, at the risk of opening up this week's episode with an all-time obvious observation, I'm going to do it anyways. Choosing a career is tough. There's so many reasons for this. However, I'd like to cut to the chase relating to one in particular. And it's centered on this idea that the only way to really know about a job or profession and what it's all about is to actually do it. What you think it's all about can actually be very different down in the trenches. Well, on today's episode, we're going to dive into the work of an RN, a registered nurse. And for many within the profession, it can represent curveball after curveball in terms of what it actually is versus what many would assume it to be when entering the field. So, quick question. I mean, if you entered a profession like this and found it not to be fitting your expectations, what would you do? Well, our guest decided to directly address some of the challenges she had been uncovering in the work of being a nurse, things that were causing serious distress to her and her colleagues. And you're going to hear all about it, from the rewards, the challenges of the work, to how she supports her nursing peers. Plus, you're in store for a truly inspiring story. And it's all coming your way in this episode. But first, let me fill you in on a few more details about our guest, and then we can launch into things. Katrina Stephenson is a registered nurse and the founder and CEO of Nurse to Nurse Peer Support, a Canadian nonprofit organization focused on providing peer support services for those within nursing. And over the last 19 years, Katrina has focused the majority of her nursing career in the harm reduction field and caring for individuals challenged by concurrent disorders, both mental health and substance abuse challenges, including trauma. And through her own experiences in compassionately caring for both her patients' traumas and her own work-related occupational nursing traumatic stress, she endeavored to create an organization to help nurses across the country manage their mental health. And in providing safe and holistic care to those within nursing, her and her organization work with government bodies, insurance agencies, employers, regulatory bodies, unions, and peers in order to create psychologically safe workplaces. And as a harm reduction nurse, Katrina believes it's essential to understand and care for people with mental health and substance abuse challenges in such a way to reduce stigma and discrimination. So with all this noted, I'd like to welcome you to my conversation with Katrina Stephenson. Yeah, so welcome to the program. How are you doing today, Katrina?
Good. Thanks, Christopher, for having me.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I'm a little nervous, but that'll
Oh yeah,
go.
it'll dissipate. Yeah. I'm really excited for this. You know, I've been having this program that's been running for a couple of years now, and I haven't really delved into the world of nursing at all. So I've been really keen to get into it and to hear from somebody like yourself. And I know listeners are quite keen to hear about this as well. So with that in mind, I do have this first segment lined up, and it's something called Coloring Wikipedia. And here I just read off a definition of something related to what the guest does. Now, surprise, surprise, I do have you down here for nursing. And I intentionally went with this really simplistic definition of what nursing is all about. And I was hoping you can kind of fill in the blanks for us. So let me just read that off and we can go from there. Does it sound okay?
Yep, sounds good.
All right. Okay, so here we go. Nursing. Nursing is a profession within the healthcare sector focused on the care of individuals, families, and communities so they may attain, maintain, or recover optimal health and quality of life. Pretty simple, pretty straightforward, but maybe, like I said, you could fill in the blanks for us.
Yeah, there's different types of nursing. I guess we could get into that a little bit. I'm a registered nurse. For that, I was a licensed practical nurse. And there's also the registered practical or the registered psychiatric nursing. Depending what province you are, there's also registered practical nursing. And I think that's in Ontario. It's the same level as LPN. So, and then we'll have to not forget the nurse practitioners as well. And that's a couple more years above the RN's education. And they kind of work like a general practitioner doctor would at your doctor's office sort of thing. So yes, we look at quality of life. We meet you at the beginning of life and we help you at the end of life. So we're there, in the whole spectrum. Nurses, depending on what program you took. For me, as an LPN, I did, bedside nursing. But as an RN, you have a little bit more room where you go, sort of thing. Nurses are nurses outside of being a nurse, if that makes sense. So if we're out in the world and in the community and we're not on shift, we are trained to be a nurse at all times. It's in our training. So it's hard to turn it off. There's been multiple times where, I've come across an accident and I can't walk by that. There's no way. There's no way. Or if I see someone in, psychological distress, I need to say something. I'm a mental health nurse. Are you okay? Right? And then that goes into our families too, right? And then if someone finds it, or a friend, you found out you're a nurse, and they're like, what about this? What about that? I'm like, so
Yeah.
it's you're always on. It becomes your identity, which can be problematic, and I'll get into that along the way. But especially if you're not nursing anymore, there's so many different specialties that you can go into. I couldn't go back to ICU or couldn't really go jump into emerge anymore because I specialized in mental health, right? So there's just so many facets, and it's so misunderstood of what we do, really, and the impact of what we do, and the environments that we work in too. So there's lots to it. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely. Like I like how you answered that, and I like how you provided that extra insights, the practical side of all these different types of nursing ways about going about, doing this job and whatnot. But then also too, like the impact and also the notion of it being part of your identity. I think with careers, I think for most careers, you do adopt a certain identity based on what you do, but some a lot more than others. And you're right. I would say like nursing, anything within the medical field, I would assume it carries something a little bit, a little bit heavier. And turning it off, I could see how that would be a challenge. It would be difficult for somebody like yourself to do those things. So yeah. And I'm sure we're going to get into this later on. Like you said, some of the challenges associated with all of that. But this might be an opportune time to learn a little bit more about you and your background. Certainly off the top, I did mention, some of your bio information and what you're all about. But as a CEO and leader essentially of this nonprofit, Nurse to Nurse Peer Support, maybe you could fill listeners in a little bit more about what that's all about.
Yeah, sure. I don't even know where to start with that one. I guess I sometimes don't even like the word CEO. I like Chief Visionary Officer.
Okay, we can go with that. Let's go with that.
Yeah, we'll get into that later. I like to meet people on equal and play like equal grounds, that power dynamic. I like to take that out very often. I like to do that because I want to meet you on that human aspect, human to human sort of thing, right? But when I started this, I was not in a good place. I started it because I can say now that I'm grateful for my traumatic stress injury that I had through nursing. But I started it because I knew there was a gap. I knew that we needed this as a nurse that worked in intensive mental health. And, I've worked in mental health. I've worked with folks homeless, and, you get to see the worst of the worst, right? And you see that pain and your heart breaks, essentially, right? So when I started this, I knew that we could do better. I knew that nurses could do better at their job, right? That we could stay in the profession longer if we had the proper supports. So my husband's a firefighter, and I used to work in the community in mental health. And I knew that firefighters, police, EMS, so paramedics and EMTs, they have peer support. So say if we all go to the same call, I can think of many times I called 911 and said it's a mental health emergency. And, if say fire got that call and they decided to come, it was, whatever. They came, police came, EMS came, and say it was like a really bad call and it was violence or, something bad, traumatic and stressful, really like jarring on your system, right? Every single one of those professionals would go back and have a peer wellness program and a peer support debriefing if they needed it. They had a built-in peer program, to support their capacity. Nurses don't. We don't.
That's mind blowing in a way. Like, yeah. You would think that would just be part of it, based again on, from a layman's perspective. Like even I would be able to identify the fact that, what you do within your work could potentially create a lot of stress and pressure and trauma, like you said. Like it's almost hard to believe that the system structurally, way it's built, didn't offer that or doesn't offer that.
It has, I'll clarify because I don't want people to say, hey, Katrina, there is programs, and there is programs. There's EFAP programs, employee assistance programs, and, great that they do that work and that they're there, and for those of us that have utilized it, and, what I hear from nurses and what I experienced was I was quite aware that my stories, what I was telling her, was quite upsetting to the people that I had seen, like the trauma talk, I'll call it, right? And she was like, you have to do that in your job. I'm like, yeah, that was part of my job, right? So it took more effort to explain what my job was and what I needed to do and how it affected me than that energy back to get what I needed to decompress and release the traumatic stress. And then the person I am, I was more worried about, so then I was like, oh, I better not tell them any more stories, right? So, there's that. But, the big question was for me, and when I started Nurse to Nurse, was why? Why is this all these mostly, male-dominated professions? Why do they have these supports? And why does a female-dominated profession, I'll throw that out there, that gender difference, why doesn't it have peer-initiated, built-in wellness program? And so years ago, even before I was injured, I started asking that question and really started advocating, like, I had someone die and I would like a debriefing, but it can't be you. You're my manager, so I can't be freely, So you need to have that debriefing within that certain amount of time or know that there's supports there and have a clear path. So if an acute stress reaction does happen, which within a month, if you don't do anything about it, PTSD will come to be. It kind of sets in more in the nervous system. At that point, you need those pathways, right? And so they weren't there. And so that's why I put a article in, I'm in Alberta, and I put an article out with our union, and it was a call to action to be like, this is my story. I had this happen. Don't feel sorry for me, essentially, but this is what's happening, not just to me, but many of us, right? I can just think of the times that, a colleague would pass me a pen and their hand would be shaken, the stress reactions. So it's like, that doesn't need to happen. There's a lot more to that, but yeah. When I put that letter out, I had nurses calling me and nurses emailing me saying, I had the same thing happen to me. Thank you for speaking out. Thank you for, saying that we need support and we need to do something different, right? And those nurses came out and we built it together. So peers of mine came together, didn't even know them, but we had something in common. We had, this lived through traumatic events. We had lived through those. We were wounded healers, right? So we're like, we know what we need, so let's build this. And that's how it came to be. Beautiful thing.
Yeah, it is. It is. It
Yeah.
is.
Yeah.
Like the type of impact that it can have, obviously, like, you can see it. I mean, just the way you described it and laid it out there too. I mean, it's obvious
Yeah.
that it's something that would be needed within your field. And the fact that you endeavored to put this out there and to create something like this, I think is, yeah, like you said, the right word is it's beautiful, I think. You
Mm-hmm.
know, in terms of the services that you are offering now and how you're
Mm-hmm.
going about supporting those within your space, like what exactly are you doing in that sense?
Yeah, so we're a small volunteer-based nonprofit. We're federal. That's our structure. And so we're always quite aware of our capacity and we want this to be sustainable, right? We really want this to keep going, So what we focus on right now is our peer support circles. And we have been doing the peer support circles since 2020. And we do them online. So obviously in 2020, we know that that's when COVID went down. And so all that stuff happened. And knowing that connection is medicine and knowing that we needed to connect on some level, that's what this, Zoom, this is literally the nurse to nurse peer support account that I'm talking to you on. So we provide those. We also, when we can and whenever it comes up organically, one-to-one support. If something comes up in a peer circle and a peer wants to connect, then we'll do that. A lot of like the peer navigation. So what that means is, and that naturally happens as nurses in a peer support circle anyways. It's like, oh, I was doing this for my nervous system regulation and I found it really effective, or I saw this provider and they're really trauma informed and it was just the greatest experience, or I went for this massage and this was great, or whatever it was that we needed for care. So that navigation kind of piece comes in there. On and off, there's been like families that come in, there's education, around that. Advocacy is huge. So I would say that the things that we're doing the most of would be advocacy for this to go like across Canada and into anywhere there's nurses, really. If I had it my way, it'd be everywhere. And, again, we aren't providing care, we're providing support. So even though we're nurses and we know a lot, and I'm a mental health nurse, I would put on my peer hat, right? So I'm not going to be that therapist, or I'm not going to be, I'm going to be your peer, right? And so that's where that, equal ground comes in, right? That's what we do. And the advocacy would be to have also for financial stability as well, and have government, employers, anyone that would want to union to support this to continue to come and support us as well in that way, because we're volunteer and we're still working. A lot of us are still working in the field, so capacity, right? We don't want to burn
Right.
out being peers either.
Yeah.
Burn out or
Yeah.
be injured, right, from doing
Yeah.
this work either. So
Yeah.
that's on our
Yeah.
minds as well. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it would seem to me like just from staying abreast with just general news, I'd say within the nursing field, and COVID certainly brought a lot of this to light. The extreme pressures that are put on those within nursing itself. I know this program is based out of Japan, and certainly I get a lot of news here. There's been mass exodus from the field even before COVID, just because of the extreme stress and pressure that put on individuals. So, I can see like obviously there is a need for something like this, and to keep that industry healthy, almost you need this to kind of stop that flow of people into it and then almost out of it within a span of 5 to 10 years. And I would assume this is probably a challenge that's taking place within Canada, the US, and a lot of other countries as well.
Oh,
So yeah,
absolutely.
yeah,
Yeah, absolutely. That is a missing part. Mm-hmm.
yeah. I got this other segment here that I'd like to skip on into a day in the life, and maybe we could learn a little bit more about what takes up your day. It sounds like the way you just spelled things out there that there's a lot of different roles, a lot of different responsibilities and things that you're involved in, but all the same, maybe you could share.
Yeah, so I have a position that allows me now, well, I have a few positions. So I have nurse to nurse peer support volunteer, right? But I need a paid job as well. So I am a mental health nurse within the Canadian Armed Forces. So I work with folks, members through the Canadian Armed Forces, and I work virtually through this, and just loving that. It's great work. And I also work at another program through the Health Authority, and it's in mental health, intensive mental health services, and it's a DBT, CBT, trauma informed program, and I'm a mental health therapist in that program as an RN. So yeah, I do that, and I'm a mom, and I'm a partner to a firefighter, and all those other roles we have too. So virtual nursing is new, right? Like this virtual world, I kind of rolled into it in a really beautiful way because I went from the nurse to nurse online peer circles and then back into like a nursing role with folks on this platform. So when I meet with the members I meet with, it is really supporting them, possibly if they have an operational stress injury, something I'm quite aware of, and I can see it. I can see it in them. I can feel it in them. You can see a person if they're dysregulated, meaning their emotions are going or they're anxious or they're upset, and you can see it in their face. You get to when you work this job, you read body language, you read people. Like that is one of my superpowers that came to be even stronger after having my own operational stress injury. So yeah, so that to me is like, yeah, that's where my joy comes in is watching people. It's slow and it's really patience trying it for folks and providing hope and providing that psychological support, finding help, even in this way of being, we need to develop trust. We need to develop an open relationship. And so, as a mental health nurse, that is the first part, right? And I will talk about that and I will give people, because you never know, you can never assume that someone hasn't been in some kind of traumatic event or had trauma in their life, maybe as a child. So I always approach people from, that trauma informed place where it gives them choice and autonomy. It's a pleasure, and it can be challenging too. So the challenge is that I can feel people so much and I can see their pain. And, sometimes the system isn't perfect, right? We know that. So navigating it with them to find the supports that they need and seeing if they are continuing in pain. And as they go through that, if you have the tools, it's great. If you don't have those tools in front of you, that's where the stress, the pressure, that's where it gets heavy. And I would call that, one of my friends, she's a researcher, Charlotte Ross. She's done some research on it, and she calls it emotional labor. And that piece can be challenging in the job. So it's a lot of mindfulness within myself and knowing if I need to stop, take a break, drink some tea, ground myself. So, it's a lot of,
Sounds like a lot of variety in the sense of like you're speaking with so many different types of people for one, but it all kind of falls under this umbrella of mental health and whatnot. But the mediums at which you're going about this sound different, whether it's through your own organization or through some of the ways that you just explained there. But also too, I guess this point of being hypersensitive to the people's issues and challenges that they're facing also helps sometimes, I'm guessing, what I'm picking up here, but then also can be a bit of a challenge for yourself because you become hyper aware of these things in yourself also. So as you just mentioned, taking some time for yourself, and to debrief maybe internally for some of these things.
and to reach out to others when I need it, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And not have any shame or, that it's normal. Like this is
Right.
being human and I don't have to be a robot anymore. I don't have to be a robot nurse. I can actually feel things and share how I feel. And yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, I have this other segment as well that I'd love to get into, a pathways one. And maybe we could rewind a little bit here. I'd love to know what initially attracted you to the field of nursing.
People. I find people so interesting. However, there was this, I think I was grade 2. I had a thing that said, what do you want to be? and I wanted to be a nurse.
Yeah.
And then as I aged and, went through life, and as a teenager, I was like, duh, everyone's telling me to be a nurse now. I'm not being a
Mhm.
nurse. I am one of those type of people. It's like, don't tell me what to do. I'm going to make my own decision. I know I'm like that. And so when I think I was about 28, around that time, I decided to go back and take my nursing. And so I'd had some life experiences, right? I'd worked, I don't know, 10 different jobs. And I knew by that time, I really knew that I wanted to be a nurse. And I already knew I was good with people. I love people. Like I absolutely like I'll just, people will come and tell me their stories on the street, and I'm like that type of person. And yeah, so it's a something that was, I guess, my calling.
Yeah, you're reflecting on these different sides, different elements of yourself and your personality and how they align with the profession itself. Really quickly,
Yeah.
when you were that age, did you realize like what field of nursing that you were going to go into? Like you said, there's so many different types. Were you drawn towards the mental health therapy side, or you were still kind of up in the air at that point?
I had no idea. But then I do remember the point where it was like, ah, this is what I like. And it was a young individual. He was about 21. He'd been in a motor vehicle accident, and he had like a bad one. And I was caring for him. And he also had an opiate addiction. And I had to do the teaching for him. And I had to learn the night before. I read and I'm studying up on this stuff. And I'm like, oh, I'm like, okay, now I understand why I can't control his pain. And so I had to do the teaching. And that was just, I don't know, the interaction with him, just how, others were treating him. And I saw how they were, discriminating and stigmatizing him, and that I wasn't going to do that. And I have gravitated ever since then, like to anyone that is like on the margins of our society or misunderstood. So it just kind of like, and I've always been someone who protects others, and I will speak up if I see something that's not just, right? Or fair. And so it reflects my personality and who I am. So I just gravitated over that way. Yeah.
Yeah, I think you just answered my next question, which was, your own personality and how that aligns, and perhaps in your youth. But you just stated it there. Sticking up for others,
Yeah.
being drawn to others, others being drawn to you. I think all of these things sort of add up, and it
Hmm.
all comes to this point of like I think for young people when they are considering careers, because like let's face it, it is a challenge, or it can be a challenge for a lot of people. I think these little moments of reflection on who you are, certainly there's different, career tests and personality tests that can help align you with careers, but also too, I think like
Yeah.
just yourself, if you really deeply think about these things or speaking with
Hmm.
others as well, you can learn a lot, about who you are and what could potentially align for you. And that's sounds like to me is what happened, with you and potentially guided you into this profession. It's just some of that deep reflection. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And just listening to your heart. Like, what is it that you love?
Mm.
I
Yeah.
love people. It just was natural. Yeah,
Yeah, yeah, yeah. All right.
yeah.
Well, we are moving on a nice clip here. I have another segment here called Q&A Discovery. Here we can kind of just continue this back and forth. Now, in terms of the field itself of nursing, I'd love to know about some of the under the radar challenges associated with it. So somebody who is like considering this field but doesn't know it in any great depth or detail, what are some things that you would say would be, a big challenge that might not necessarily show up on a brochure or elsewhere? And then conversely too, I'll throw this out there as well. Like, what are some of the rewards in the same light? Things that you wouldn't necessarily notice, but you being, embedded within this career for quite some time, you're fully aware that these are things that, are wonderful elements of the job.
Oh, yeah, for sure. And, I'm going to start with the rewards first. What I reflect on this with new nurses too, when I do mentorship, and how I personally, for nursing, I would avoid conflict like the plague. So conflict resolution wasn't really, I was like, oh God, I don't want to, I am a peacekeeper. Like I love keeping the peace, but I also, there conflict resolution is skill, and being able to talk to people when they're upset, and knowing when to talk to a person when they're maybe not so upset, right? And limit setting, and all of the communication skills that you learn. So I would say going through nursing, and especially then when I got into mental health nursing, is that my conflict resolution skills are, I think, like they went from avoidance to like, okay, I'm getting right in there and getting I'm really getting in there, right?
Yeah.
It's okay. And because with conflict, if you can manage it well, some beautiful things can come out of it, and we can learn some really, like, there's a lot of learning to happen. So I would say that would be one of the things that I personally, because going from this really shy person, young, shy, and by the time I was 28, I was still a little shy, a little introverted. Yeah, that's what it built my confidence too, and my abilities to relate to others as well, like my self-confidence and my self-esteem even, right? Like, wow, I can do this work.
I can make a difference, right? Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. I think if I relate back to maybe I can remember when I was in school, and, if I get into some of the things that I wish I would have known, or maybe, it could have prevented maybe my stress injury, we get into that piece a little bit. And I hear this from nurses all the time. It's not just me. And it's knowing what the risks are. What are the risks? Well, it's a stressful job, right? What is stress? What does stress do to the nervous system, right? Okay. And what do we do when we have a traumatic stress injury? Where do we go? How do we support ourselves? How do we, who can look after this if it gets worse, right? What does it look like in my body? What does it feel like? How does it come out in my emotions and my behaviors and my thoughts and the way that I am with others? If I'm getting to that point of, compassion fatigue, or, if I'm getting in that realm, like, oh, okay, let's come back, and let's do some, like, literally some self-care can be thrown around, but like self-care and connection with others, and figuring out what do I need in my environment, internally and externally, to care for myself. So I wish that we had more education when we're going through school, and I think they're getting better from what I hear, and that we were reminded throughout, and maybe even there was some quality of workplace, evaluations that could happen that was anonymous. And then you could be like, okay, if you're having these symptoms, there's this program. And in my perfect world, there's a peer support program, there's an EFAP program, there's some provide preferred providers list that you have, right? And you know that those supports are out there if you have an event that's really impactful, right? And knowing that it's normal, just normalizing it because it's normal. That's what happens to our nervous system. And that's where the robot came in. I'm not a robot. Knowing our
Right.
limits. And
Yeah.
I think the other part is self-advocacy, and knowing that you have every right to advocate for yourself, and just like you do for others.
Yeah, I appreciate you sharing that. I think like one of the things that stood out to me in listening to all of this is I think a lot of people would have this basic idea or understanding that yes, okay, nursing does represent a fairly stressful profession, but what it is it's like this repetitive stress, day in and day out, and as you just mentioned, like what that does to you, emotionally, physiologically, and then again, I guess what outlets are there and what's available to you. I mean, these are things that certainly need to be inherently built within the structure of the system. And it sounds like it's coming along, and hopefully with, the rise of mental health awareness and whatnot, because that's taken a big jump probably in the last 5 to 10 years, I would say, that hopefully these systems are kind of coming along in tow with all of this. But I appreciate hearing that because yeah, these are things certainly you have to be again reflecting on who you are, as we were just speaking earlier, and what drives you, but then also too like what could be some potential pitfalls or what could maybe not necessarily align with you. And And if you are faced with some challenging moments, how do you go about, navigating those moments? So yeah.
Absolutely. A friend of mine we were talking the other day and we were talking about how firefighters are trained to go into a fire, right? And so we need the same type of training, right? And so and it's repetitive. And I think that's important so that it builds our resilience. And that's what we need. Like some people don't get injured in this job and some of us do. And it doesn't mean that we're lesser than. It just maybe the type of work that we picked, and maybe it was a lot of repetition over,
Yeah.
you know? So it doesn't mean that a person's going to come into this job and get injured, right? It just means that we just need to be aware. Awareness is key.
Well, I have this other question here, and I know we've been speaking about some of the challenges, of the profession itself, but maybe you could shift on over a little bit into some of the rewards of the work as well, because I definitely want to highlight those. In terms of your career to this point, what would have been some of your biggest wins, or things that you reflect on, you think about, you get a sense of gratitude?
So many. I have met so many people that have just impacted my life in such amazing ways. Just like my heart just feels full just when I talk about it. Like it's just, uh, like I said earlier, right? You meet the baby that's born. Like that first time that I saw a baby born, oh man, I don't know who's crying more, the mom. Right?
Yeah.
So like that first, I can remember that. I can feel that still. Like, and I used to work palliative and I'd be with people and their families, and how much of a privilege it is to be in that private space with other humans and doing those real life things that are, gonna help someone. The other thing that has been really supportive, impactful is just, the thank yous and the gratitude that you get. That fills you up. That fills me up every day. That's what keeps me coming back. It's an unreal feeling, right? Of gratitude for sure.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. Yeah, it sounds like to me like these deeply intimate moments that you're part of essentially, right? And how can that not have some sort of impact or rub off on you in a positive way? Well, maybe we could shift over into this water cooler story segment here. And in this segment, I just ask, guests to indulge listeners with the story related to their work. So I'd be really curious to hear what you have for us today.
well, one popped up thinking there's so many popped up. I have worked a lot with folk that lived in poverty, lived with trauma through their whole lives, have been through traumas, dealing with undiagnosed, with trauma, there's going to be mental health challenges, right? You're going to have some symptoms that cause you not to trust the world, right? And when I first meet people, and in this one particular person I'm thinking of, they are the really big individual. He had been living in homelessness, but he was, doing better. He had been using drugs, and he had a lot of chronic pain. So he used opiates, and the system's just not built. And this is why we have an opiate crisis. He had some chronic pain as well, right? So he had been medicating while getting medication, and then the doses got too high because that's what happens with opiates. And so I had advocated for him. At one point, he had his medication taken away from him. I had called the doctor's office, and I had a little bit of a resistance when I got there. I had some not so welcoming calls from the clerk when I asked to talk to the doctor. And once I got through the doctor, I told him what was going on and that he needed his medication refilled. But I had some roadblocks there, right? And at that time, I was getting close to leaving that job. And the day that I left, I ran into him. And I was sad about leaving that job, but I needed to go because it was just it was a heavy, heavy job, not enough resources in that case. So I knew by that time that that was what I needed to do. And I met him, and he was outside. He's like, "What are you doing? You got all these bags." I'm like, and I was sad because I was leaving, and he was like, "No, you can't go. And are you okay? I'm like, I'm leaving. I gotta go. This is my last day. And he's like, Katrina, I just have to thank you. It's the first time that my doctor talked to me like a man, like man to man. And he's like, I felt so respected. I felt heard. And the doctor said to me, you've got a good nurse over there. she she called me and she got through. And so he said, I just want to thank you for doing that. And I just wanted to let you know. And it was just as I was leaving that job, and it was just so impactful for me. I was like, oh God, oh,
Yeah.
and like in a good way, a good cry, joyful cry. So it was just, yeah, like, and so many moments like that, Christopher, like when you see a person for a person and who they are, not their behaviors, but you understand that it comes for something. There's always a root, right? So it's like, oh, he was heard, he was seen, and he was cared for. And that's all we all want, right? Like, and I knew that all that pushing and resistance I got was worth it in the end.
No, what a beautiful story. What a beautiful
Yeah,
story. And I think it's on the heels of what we were just speaking about earlier, like
yeah,
the type of impact that you can have within the profession. And like I think you've already said that this is like that is exactly what keeps you coming back, despite all the stress, all the pressures, everything else. And it's that, at the end of the day, if you can create that impact, yeah, for sure, for sure. You're doing something good within the world, right? Obviously. Yeah. Well, thank you for sharing that. We do have this last segment here. We're rounding the bend. It's a crystal ball segment. As the name implies, we're looking to the future, trends, predictions, so on and so forth. And within most industries right now, tech is what's dominating. There's a lot of talk, about things like AI and increased efficiencies and all of this stuff. And I would guess that within nursing, this is something that's being looked into, obviously, and probably already being leveraged to a certain degree. And perhaps, again, increased efficiencies there can help lessen the burden, lessen the load on professionals like yourself. But again, I'm from the complete outside here. I have really no true insight into any of this. So I'd love to hear a little bit about how technology is affecting your work or how it could be, down the line 3 to 5 years from now.
if I look at the future and if I use my crystal ball, I could maybe see that, maybe there'll be a time where a lot of folks have those smartwatches, and it could be hooked up somehow through this. And I know it's happening in some places. I don't know. I couldn't tell you where, but I've heard about it, read a little bit more about it. But where I could see maybe I'm doing some prolonged exposure with them, right? Because they have a trauma, and nurses can do that work as well. So, and I could see their heart rate, and I could see their rest rate, and I could talk them through their dysregulation due to being in large spaces or something like that. And I could be here and you're way over there in another country or another place, right? So I think for when it comes to technology, I feel like I think it's gonna be positive as long as it's used for positive things, right? Obviously. But it's gonna open us up to a whole other world of people and other, hopefully, countries, and see how they're doing it. How can we do it better? Oh, that's working, that's not working. Where does human need to come in? And when does this, AI come in and support us? I used AI for the first time the other day. As a individual, I'm running a retreat for nurses this fall, and I used AI chat GT, what is it?
GPT.
GPT.
Yeah.
Yeah, I tried
Yeah.
that. Oh my goodness. I was like, I put in all the important words I wanted. I was like,
Yeah.
wow, I'm like, is this what they're doing? They're getting their papers written and
Oh yeah. It's a game changer.
right,
I know.
right?
I know. I know.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
yeah, but it's like, well, what about calligraphy? And like, are we losing that ability? And so
Mhm.
it's like, how do you balance? It's like a balance. Everything's all a balance, right?
Exactly. It's kind of defining those guardrails for it as well. Okay, we want its help for this, and this, but we don't want it to touch this aspect of the work, for example. This is an area we shouldn't allow it to go. And I think that's the interesting time that we're within right now is everyone's trying to figure that out. see how far we can go with it, maybe where we should. So yeah, all the same though, I think, it can lead to different levels of understandings, related to, people's health and what you were just kind of explaining there, the rise of smartwatches and maybe monitoring people's health in real time and being able to decipher what's truly going on. So yeah, I can see how things are shifting and changing. And most certainly I'm sure that's going to be a big part of the future of nursing is this deeper integration with it all. So yeah. But I got to say here, Katrina, it's been an absolute pleasure. And I know listeners are absolutely going to love all the insights that you shared today. So thanks again for joining the program.
Oh, you're welcome, Christopher. Yeah, I really do want there to be more nurses. We need more nurses. And if your heart calls you that way, then yeah, come.
Now, for those interested in learning more about Katrina and her work, you can do so via LinkedIn, Facebook, Instagram. You can also check out her website, Nurse to Nurse Peer Support. And for reference, all this information, including links, will be in the show notes. And hey, if you like today's show, please be sure to tell a friend and share. You can also show further support by rating, reviewing, and subscribing wherever you access your podcast. As I mentioned off the top, you can head on over to YouTube. I do have a channel over there which hosts highlights from these main audio recordings. And finally, don't forget to join us on the next episode of Life as A, where we'll continue to explore and unearth the details of professions and the people behind them. I'm your host, Christopher Schoenwald. Until next time, stay curious about life and living.